Hi, I'm Tom Elliott, founder of Ocuroot, and I'm pleased to be sponsoring this podcast. If you need help taking control of your CI/CD pipelines, come see us at ocuroot.com.
Hi, I'm Matt Little. I'm the Director of Counselling and Education, Empowering Awareness.Asia, and I'm a proud sponsor of this podcast.
Hey, how's it going? Ah, there we go. Haha, I see you.
Doing good, sir. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Getting the week kicked off.
Awesome. Firstly, thank you very much for giving me opportunity to interview you for my podcast.
Ah, no, appreciate the opportunity to be on it.
So I've gone through your profile. I can see you're doing great work. I thought to tell about your work to my audience.
Hmm.
So can you please introduce yourself to my audience?
Yeah, sure. I'm Tom Elliott. I've been in the software industry for coming up on about 20 years now. I worked at a variety of different companies, including VMware, a small VPN company, a medium-sized SaaS company, and I just left that last summer to start my own business building developer tooling focused on CI/CD. The product I'm building is called Ocuroot, and it's a CI/CD orchestration platform intended to help medium-sized businesses to manage large numbers of production environments.
So right now, your full-time role is working for your own company.
Oh yeah, yeah, doing the whole solo founder thing, which is a lot of fun, and bootstrapping. So
Great.
a lot of different balls to juggle at the moment.
Wonderful. So you're from?
So originally I'm from the UK, grew up in the middle of England, spent 10 years in London, got bored and moved to New York.
Great. So before talking about Ocuroot that you have started, can you tell a bit about your previous roles or the inspiration behind starting this company?
Yeah, sure. The previous company that I worked at was a company called Yext. They're focused around pushing data to directories across the web, sort of helping businesses manage all the data about their locations and all that sort of thing. And I was running effectively sort of a DevOps group within that company for about 5 years. And we were focused on developer tooling, the CI/CD tooling that we had, and sort of helping the engineering teams be more productive. And because of the way that the business was growing and some of the markets that we were moving into, we were finding we were adding more and more production environments as we went. So we had a whole bunch of point of presence environments for serving data to people across the world, East Coast, West Coast, Europe, Japan. And we also wanted to create a site in Europe for like GDPR and all this similar data sovereignty regulations. And that was really tough. We had to go back, look at what we had in the data center, and sort of get the infra team had to set everything up from scratch and sort of like remember all the little things that had happened over the years to get it to where it was. And then the product engineering teams were let loose on it, and their big questions were things like, how do we know it's okay to start these things up in this order? Like, oh, this thing depends on this thing. How do we manage that? And it just felt like that was way too painful a process to have to go through at all, and let alone, we were talking about doing it again for other things. And so I was looking at the way that we were putting all those things together, and the CI tooling that we were using, the processes we were going through, and what I wanted was something that was a little bit more adaptable, was more focused on the relationships between the different services that we were deploying, And we kind of like, figure out all of those questions, like what order to put stuff in, and like, making sure that you had, say, a Kubernetes cluster or a Nomad cluster before you started putting applications on it, that kind of thing. I, had this idea sort of like boiling in the back of my head for a few months, and it sort of formed into what is now Ocuroot. And it felt like it was kind of a good time to go off and and try to make a go of that and sort of make that into a real product. Because I'm seeing that like there are plenty of companies that have these kinds of problems, for varying reasons. I've actually been really surprised at all the different reasons that companies can need to have all of these production environments. But at the same time, I think there's going to be some interesting things happening in the future with, like the rise of AI, having to make sure that you're testing everything effectively, that you've got good processes to test things before they go into production. Maybe you're running canaries, you're doing blue-green deployments, or that kind of thing, making sure that that's as easy as possible to get going.
So, what exactly the problem that you want to solve?
So the big problem for me is sort of like managing those many production environments, and I think like that can be boiled down more to like you have a lot of production environments, but they also have different requirements for deploying. So it's sort of giving you the ability to have really fine-grained control over a lot of different environments and making sure that you're following all the rules to get things deployed there. So the sort of overlap between management and compliance, effectively.
So, what size of applications actually get benefit of the tool that you have created?
Cool. Yeah, that's a great question. From the companies that I've talked to so far, it really seems to take hold. First of all, like this is definitely a B2B problem. Like, that you're more likely to have more environments if you're selling to other businesses, especially if you're selling to like regulated industries like banks or healthcare, where your customers are going to have a lot more stringent requirements on you. But there's also a point at which you've got a lot of people working together to manage these environments. So, sort of like I'm sort of problem emerging in B2B companies that have like 50 to 100 engineers, and beyond that. And that kind of correlates somewhere between like, 500 and 5,000 employees. So that's sort of where I've been really, really focusing a lot of the conversations that I've been having.
Okay, so I mean, how many people are working on this tool, and what's your team?
Oh, what is my team? Well, okay, my team is just me right now. But yeah, and that's been in itself quite a lot of fun. Getting to sort of try a whole bunch of different things, getting a lot of flexibility. We can talk more about that later. In terms of people that are using this, I've probably got like 10 to 20 alpha users at the moment. Most of those are sort of individuals trying on personal projects and things. Talking with a couple of companies about sort of what a more production use case would look like for them. So very, very early days so far.
So you worked internally in the team and in the product development or in the development environment and a lot of your technology career. Now you came with this tool, creating this, and you want to solve a business problem. So do you have that business mindset when you was a working for the product development, or you really wanted to start something someday, but you want to solve a problem and you want to learn something. That's why the reason you are observing things that you were working in different domains at different companies and different projects.
Oh, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of layers to that one. So in terms of like previous experience and sort of the things that are kind of similar, in my last role, like working on internal tooling, like we didn't have a product manager and we weren't really selling what we were building, but like we were trying to tailor a solution to people we were sitting right next to. And that was sort of a big leap because previously, like even within the same company, I'd been working on product, and the situation there is like it's very easy to get removed from the customer because you're you've got all these layers between you and the end user. So you've got the account reps, you've got the salespeople, you've got customer support,
Yeah.
and and the product managers, and it's very easy to get into a situation where the only time you talk to a customer is when they're really really angry, which is never a fun thing. And I sort of got into the whole DevOps kind of side of things because I was like building tools on the side to just sort of help myself. And they got kind of popular within the organization when people found out that I put these things together and they were like working for me. I got a huge amount of satisfaction from that, and that sort of turned into the opportunity to run a group doing that kind of thing. And that came with it like a certain amount of freedom in that I kind of within the group we could figure out what we needed to build next. It wasn't like driven by sales targets or sort of the direction the company as a whole was going in. We didn't have those like really strong signals of the direction we needed to go in. We needed to sort of figure out once removed, okay, well, this is where the company's going, this is what the developers are going to need to make that happen. And so that kind of like feels sort of similar to what I'm doing now, in that I'm sort of like looking one level higher. I'm looking at what the market's doing and what that's going to need for what developers are going to need to be successful there. And it's been really fun just like talking to different people and finding out what their challenges are, the way that they're currently trying to solve them. Sort of a lot of surprises around like just how much regulation can affect different companies, for example. And in terms of like having wanted to do this for a while, yeah, there's I've always wanted to build something from scratch. And I get a lot of satisfaction from creating something new, and this is sort of the ultimate expression of that. So I'm really enjoying the opportunity to create something both that I want to use, and I am using my product to build my product, which is one of the really nice things about working in DevTools. But also seeing other people use it and finding out like surprising ways that they're using it as well.
So how's your feeling today? You have created a tool that you like, and with all the experience that you had in technology industry.
So it's a mixed bag right now, because not only I've built a thing, I love it, I would love more people to use it. That would be really cool. But at this point, there's now everything that I've learned in the last like 6 to 9 months. And that's sort of making me rethink a lot of my initial assumptions. So it's sort of feeling like now is where the really hard work comes in, where I've got to take this idea that I've sort of built a bit of an MVP around, and transform that into a product that's really going to be useful for a broad range of users. Even within the niche that I'm looking in. And so I actually had a bit of an epiphany last week while I was on a train and started sort of jotting down some ideas of how I can sort of adjust a bit of the model that I'm using, make some changes to the SDK to sort of unlock some of the capabilities that I'm hearing people are really wanting. And so there's sort of elements of going back to the drawing board, but there's also building on top of everything that's come before. So that's exciting, and sort of like getting in front of more people is a fun challenge, because everyone is clamoring for everyone's attention. So, as I'm sure you are well aware, hosting your podcast.
Yeah.
Sort of like finding avenues where I can talk to people and talk to new people, is an ever continuing challenge.
So it's been 7 months. You started this company.
It's about 9. I started last June. Yeah.
9 months. So how you explain the clients or the customers that you have, or explaining about it, because your previous role was more into concentrating on the application and the internal things, but now you have another responsibility. You are looking at the project in the top perspective. You are into sales now. You have built it, and you are seeing the market, observing it, and also just now you have mentioned it, how it is going to be useful in medical industry or in other industry. So how this nine experience has been, and what you have understood, what do you how do you define this transformation, and if you can able to explain this in a non-technical way, so that my audience, who are the customers, the
Yep.
business owners, can able to get your technical points easily.
Yeah, I get there's again there's a lot to that question. I think one thing that one thing that immediately springs to mind about sort of how the last 9 months have been and what I've learned is that there's a lot of value in being a certain level of uncomfortable. And I'm finding that there's sort of a sweet spot where I'm just uncomfortable enough that I'm learning and I'm making myself able to do new things. But I'm not so uncomfortable that I can't make any progress. And that's somewhere I've got to get used to being, because if I'm gonna get better at what I'm doing, I'm always gonna be uncomfortable. I'm always gonna be a little bit beyond what's easy and what's trivial for me to do. Um, a lot of that is, for me personally, is around communication. And sort of like I spend ages drafting emails, probably way too long, because like it's a form of communication I'm not very comfortable with. I much prefer like face to face. Um, and so I'm sort of like making myself do more and more of that to get better at it. And I'm seeing that I'm getting better at it. It is getting easier.
So which industry application is going to get more benefit out of this tool that you have created, Ocuroot?
Yeah. So um, in terms of industry, I mean, like as I said, sort of B2B is definitely a thing. I'm talking to a lot of people in healthcare at the moment, and sort of like people who are selling to healthcare providers. Um, and I've also been talking to people who have customers in the financial industry. Um, and it's right now this is sort of in the hypothesis phase. And I think that there's going to be some sort of like narrowing and focus as I talk to more people and sort of see where the patterns are. But I think that those are sort of the kind of the indicators for me right now of sort of like when people might have the problems that I'm trying to solve. Um, there's also been some talk about people who do physical processes, like working with robotic automation and all that kind of thing. That's something I'm not super familiar with, but a lot of people have said that these problems of being able to basically try out a bunch of things, verify them, and have really good control of getting your software out is somewhere that people are going to see these sorts of challenges. There's also, with like the absolute explosion of AI driven companies over the last year or two. Um, that's also somewhere that I'm sort of like poking at from the edges and trying to learn more about and sort of see what patterns are emerging in the way that people are deploying their AI applications. Either they're deploying models or they're deploying a server that's interacting with a model. And that's kind of a different pattern than what I've seen in more traditional sort of SaaS outfits. Um, so I guess that was sort of a whistle stop tour of a bunch of different areas of industry. I guess sort of anyone who is building reasonably complex software that has those sort of problems, I think, are people that would potentially be able to benefit.
So your tool is more into B2B.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I've spoken to some B2C customers, and what tends to happen with them is that they're actually able to get by with like one environment, and everyone can hit the same endpoint. So they're not having to do things like customer isolation for safety of data. For example, they're not having to provide extra compute capacity for one subset of their users. I actually spoke to someone from a reasonably large B2C company that has exactly two environments. They have they actually have two production environments, and they're doing like full blue green deployments across both of them. So like they deploy to one and then they flip that to be the one that all the traffic's going to. Which like absolutely blew my mind because of the sheer scope of what they're deploying. But yeah, it's like these are problems that are significantly more prevalent with B2B companies.
So the people that you gonna interact is going to be completely technology people to actually let them know uh, about Doctorate and how it will be helpful and beneficial for their application management.
Yeah. Primarily, I think that the people who are going to see the most benefit from the concepts in Ocuroot are going to be technical people, like sort of people within platform teams, SREs, and the end line developer. There's a lot of things that I'm putting in place that are tailored to providing a better development experience. Like one thing that I'm adamant about is not configuring things with YAML, using imperative code. So if someone wants to write an if statement or a for loop, they can write an if statement or a for loop. They don't need to learn all these quirky little things around the YAML DSL. I've seen a lot of things in incident management. So there's features that I'm building in as sort of first class concepts that are conducive to helping with incident management. So things like one-click rollbacks, and sort of automation around removing bad builds from the system as a whole, and tying back into your monitoring. And just because I want a good experience as an engineer myself, so I'm trying to build an experience that I'm going to enjoy. And so those are the people that I've been talking to the most, at least folks that have a connection to the technology and the developer experience. Of course, the other side of that is that they're usually not the people who actually buy stuff. So there's other aspects, the improving the experience of folks outside of the engineering org as well. So there's tooling around being able to pull history of a build for compliance reasons. One pain that we always had in my previous job was doing audits, and we had to take a ton of screenshots of our CI tool. I want to make that process a lot easier out of the box as well.
So, as a founder of your company, and there is an engineer, before this person. So, if this company, founder is asking the engineer how this tool is beneficial for my business, if you ask yourself from founder, a founder is asking the engineer in you, what answer you will give as an engineer?
Yeah, I think that there's a big potential for a productivity boost here. Like I'm even using this product myself to build the product. I'm finding that I'm able to move a lot more quickly. I can make adjustments to the process for deploying a lot more easily. And one thing I didn't mention is that I can test everything locally without having to push it up to a CI platform and sort of wait for a build. So I'm finding I'm able to turn things around pretty quickly. And there's also a sense of security that I'm getting from knowing that I have all of these checks in place, and that I can sort of verify that they're actually doing what I expect them to do ahead of time. So, I can run all of my tests and run them separately locally before I push. And it's easy to get into a position with a lot of tools out there where you kind of paint yourself into a corner. And so, like, problems that I've had in the past is that you have a bunch of tests that run whenever you commit something, but you don't really know how to run those tests before you do the commit. So those are things that I'm trying to just make as easy as possible. And for me, it's like a big accelerator, and I can get features that much quicker.
So, what are the developers like who are doing this role, who are who is working on management of the application? What kind of questions that you are being asked after creating this company, like regarding Ocuroot?
So talking to engineers is always a long list of features that they'll ask about. That's always a classic thing. I think there's because I'm sort of focused on environments, a lot of people ask me about ephemeral environments. And so the idea that you can create an environment to like just do a one-off test of something, like say someone has a pull request and they want to be able to preview that, like it'll create everything so that you've got somewhere to sort of view the code running. There's been a lot of conversation about that, and that's something I've been sort of tweaking my model to allow for. The people have also been asking sort of, they'll usually have a very specific use case in mind. It's sort of like, oh, we want to do canaries, we want to do blue green, we want to do other kinds of testing, and they want to see examples of that. And there's a lot of questions around existing tools that people use. So, like very early on, I think before I got a lot of my messaging to where it is now, I had a lot of questions about like, does this support AWS? Does this support Terraform? Does this support Helm? And one of the things that I'm very keen to do is make Ocuroot kind of tooling agnostic. So when it comes down to it, if you can run it in a shell, you can use it with Ocuroot, and it's just providing a nice little wrapper and some glue between the different pieces that you're using. So while I might make some put some things in place like some modules and things like that that'll make it easy to work with particular technologies, I don't want to sort of tie people into a particular technology. Particularly because I think like a lot of tooling these days is very Kubernetes focused, for example, and not everyone uses Kubernetes for everything, and nor should they. So I think that one of the big things I do want to maintain is the ability to use whatever tools you're already using, and to just get a bit more efficiency and a bit more orchestration around those. And that also goes for existing CI tools. So Ocuroot can run on top of things like GitHub Actions and Jenkins, so that it's really easy to try it out and just adopt it. And then you can sort of go from there and grow more naturally than trying to just rip and replace everything.
How it works on-prem and also on cloud?
Yeah. So right now I'm running my alpha in the cloud as sort of a hosted solution, largely because that's just easier for people to get up and running. But because of the kinds of companies that I'm hoping to work with and the kinds of security concerns, regulations, and all that sort of thing, there would be sort of a self-hosted option, and I've been working to make sure that that's as easy as possible. Like the Ocuroot server is one binary. All you need is that binary in a database, and you're good to go.
So, how actually Ocuroot helps any business in their productivity?
So around the productivity, the main aim I think is just removing barriers and annoyances from engineers. So the things that are really annoying are like, hey, you've written some code, in order to verify that you've got to wait for 20 minutes. Or like you get this big string of commits that's like, okay, updating the CI config, I made a typo, another commit, and then like by the end of it, you've done like 20 commits and 2 hours for something that probably would have taken you 5 minutes if you can see the results immediately. So it's sort of like trying to remove as many of those annoyances and barriers as possible, so that people can get really, really fast feedback on what they're working on and move forward quickly.
So, what is your experience as a DevOps engineer or as a developer?
So, as I mentioned, I've been in the industry a while, and sort of there's been a little bit of DevOps type stuff in a lot of what I did. It wasn't necessarily called that at the time. Like my first big exposure to CI/CD, for example, was I was working at a small consumer VPN company, and we wanted to. Well, we had a Windows client that came in a 32-bit and a 64-bit versions, and I was running the 64-bit version on my test machine. And we put out a change that broke the 32-bit version, and then all of a sudden just get this flood of complaints coming in on our support channel. And so we were hunting around for a way of making it easier to test without having to have 5 VMs running for each of the different flavors of our builds to do it manually. So we found the concepts of CI and CD, and picked up Jenkins, and found like a pipeline plugin. It was to do with a plugin at the time, and I hooked that up to a few VMs. So at that point, we could just at least verify that you could install the client and connect on each of the platforms that we said that we supported, and that made a huge difference to sort of our peace of mind in being able to put releases out. We actually got a lot faster at getting releases out doing that. And then when I moved to work for Yext, they had a much more mature kind of DevOps approach. They onboarded a CI platform pretty quickly after I joined, and they were doing a lot of things around testing, and there was we were always trying to crack load testing. That was the big challenge. We found a bunch of different ways of doing that. We did, we were doing the canary deploys. We were we had various kinds of monitoring in place, and so that was a great experience to be able to sort of see how a bit of a more mature company can do that kind of thing within a SaaS landscape. And I was able to try a few different things in my role running that DevOps type group, and I was managing the incident management process for a while. So got to learn a lot about what goes through someone's head when they're woken up at 2 a.m. Everyone always says 2 a.m. No one ever says 4. But the kind of things that people need to have at their fingertips when they're trying to solve a problem quickly, and they're not in the best frame of mind. And a lot of things around automation. We put in place a automatic failover mechanism for some of our consumer serving regions, for example. So like if there was a problem detected in one region, we just take it out of DNS, and all the others would pick up the slack until we could fix it. So yeah, it was I've tried a whole bunch of different things in the DevOps space, and sort of learned a lot from each one.
So working as an engineer in different teams and on different projects, and interacting with your team members, and also seeing also the business side of the technology, interacting with the clients. So these interactions with the development team who are working on the production, and also to the client who is actually who has a business. So how these interactions actually made you to do the product that you made?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think like the more and more of those interactions that I've had, the more satisfying it's been. I think there's like I've definitely learned over the last few years that there's a really big gap between what you think people want and what they actually want. And there's also a big gap between what people want and what they actually need. So there's a heck of a lot of reading between the lines that you've got to do here. I've had conversations where people were convinced that they needed this particular thing. There's like, because they'd sort of heard this new term, and they were like, oh, this would solve this problem that we have. Like, like, oh, if we put a service mesh in place, think of all these things that we could do. But you sort of drill down a little bit, and you find out the real thing that's annoying them, and a lot of the time you can find a much simpler solution than putting in a really big complex system. And I think that's been something that's kind of carried through as I've gone. It's sort of like getting to the root of the problem and the ask, and like trying to find the simplest way to satisfy the need, because then you're going to be able to move a lot more quickly.
So how the applications that you worked actually helped you to, get a solution with this product?
Yeah, so there's a lot that I'm drawing from my previous experience here. I've worked on sort of making it easier for people to configure CI pipelines in the past, and I've also been frustrated by ways of configuring CI pipelines. I've worked with a bunch of different CI technologies as I've gone through, so I've sort of seen a lot of the landscape. I've also had a lot of experiences where there've been challenges in getting deployments out. Something that I've always seen people ask is like, is this running in production? Maybe you've got the bi-weekly demos, and you need to make sure that the change that you're going to be demoing is actually in the environment you're going to be demoing in. Or you've got a customer who wants to use a particular feature, and you're not even sure if that feature is available for their region. So that's something that I've kind of had as an annoyance in the back of my mind for quite some time, and I want to make that as easy as possible. And usually, what you have to do is kind of glue together a lot of different technologies to do that. But as much as possible, I want to put the right information in front of people in Ocuroot as easily as possible. And so if you've got a question about what you've deployed and where, you shouldn't need an additional tool to have to figure that out.
So what are the challenges that you experienced while creating this product?
So balancing a whole bunch of different use cases has been a challenge. There's a lot of things that people want to do with CI. I mentioned a few things like canaries and all that kind of thing. And there's a lot of different requirements that people are going to have on, like, who can approve this? I want to make sure that there's a human in the loop before this goes to production, or like, we can only deploy X number of times a week. Balancing all those and providing an interface that makes it easy to achieve results has been a big challenge, and I'm sort of continuously iterating on that. Another challenge that I've had has been sort of selecting the subset of the problems that I want to tackle. There's a lot of things that people can do with CI. There's a lot of things that people want to do tangential to CI, especially when you start talking about compliance and security. And there are a lot of features in existing products. I cannot possibly implement all of those features myself. So I've got to boil things down to figure out what is the minimal viable product that is going to be able to provide value to people and they're going to find useful. I actually went through an exercise a couple of weeks ago, taking out features that I'd put in that like people didn't really need at this point, and they weren't entirely fully baked. So it just made more sense to get rid of them, have something a lot simpler, a lot more pure, that's easy for people to get to grips with and get results from.
So the businesses that who want to use your product, like, what do you think that, I mean, keeping this aside, like, what are the mistakes that most of the businesses are doing and that you think they need to use your product to solve the problem?
Well, I might try and reframe that a little bit because I don't necessarily want to be telling people that what they're doing is wrong. And I don't want to be prescriptive, and I think that's actually something that could cause me challenges. Is if I go into a business and I say to them, "Hey, you're doing all of this wrong. You need to do it my way." Like, they're not going to trust me, nor should they. I think some of the places where people can get themselves, in a difficult situation or find themselves with challenges, are when it requires a lot of human back and forth to get things done. So the more people that you involve in a process, the slower it's going to go. So if you have, say, in order to get some software out, get a change out from your repo to production, you need to do a code review. So that requires back and forth. That takes time. Sometimes that can take days. And then you do your build, deploy to a staging environment, run some tests, and then you have a human who has to approve that going to production. That's another step that can slow you down. And it's very easy to add more and more of these steps and more of these approvals. And in the end, you want to be deploying as quickly as possible, but you've got to get sign off from like 5 different people at different stages of the process. So all of a sudden, it takes days and days to get something out. That can be very frustrating. Actually saw that in the past. We had a documentation system that was, it was all marked down, all in a code repo. And we had the code review process in place to approve any changes to documentation. And everyone complained about this because even if you wanted to correct a typo, you had to get approval. So in the end, we took away the requirement for those approvals, and things ticked up a little bit, but there was still a lot of friction. And we moved to a wiki that anyone could edit at any time, and all of a sudden, the number of edits and the quality of the documentation exploded. All of a sudden, we removed this barrier to getting something out there and getting something done, and people were participating a lot more. Documentation is a little bit different than production software. There's a different need for correctness and a different set of quality requirements. But I think the big thing is the more barriers to entry that you remove, and the more human steps you can take out safely, the quicker people are going to be able to deploy, and the more they're going to be able to get out.
So the more new functionalities that have been added to the application, which is already in the market. So how your tool is going to help them?
So I guess you said there's a lot of other tools in the market, and sort of how am I going to be different? There's a few things I'm trying that are different than a lot of what's out there right now. Now I think there's a bit of a movement right now for being able to write things as imperative code rather than like YAML or HCL or something like that. That's more declarative. They're seeing a lot of products that are doing that now, and that's sort of a wave that I want to ride. Something I believe in. The trick is being able to do it in such a way that it's intuitive and easy to work with. But some of the other things I'm focusing on is trying not to be pipeline driven, but more sort of based around concepts that people are familiar with, builds, tests, deploys.
Sorry for that. So
no, that's fine. I guess you'll have a little editing to do, right?
Yeah. So my question was how businesses which belongs to different industries. I mean, you already mentioned the healthcare industry. I mean, how it is going to be useful and how it is different from others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess the big differentiator that I have with Ocuroot is that working in a different abstraction layer. And a lot of tools are focused on sort of building up pipelines, building up DAGs, so that, in theory, you can do whatever you want. But what this means is that a lot of the time you're reinventing the same concepts over and over again. You're sort of like figuring out how to do, builds, deploys, tests, rollouts, all that kind of thing from first principles. There's also like continuous delivery tools, but they're sort of separated from the build and stuff. So what I want to do is provide a tool that is focused on the concepts that developers are familiar with already. And I've talked to a lot of people, and they all use the same terminology, like build, deploy, environment, test, in various combinations. And I want to make those primitives as easy to work with as possible, so that you can get results really, really quickly. And in terms of what that can provide to these specific industries is like, so if you have the idea of you have a deployment that has to behave a certain way for one customer but differently for another customer. Say you've got a customer with a very, very strong compliance requirement that you can only deploy once every 2 weeks, and that has to that has to go through all of these different layers of approval. I'm not a fan of layers of approval, but you can't avoid them sometimes. You don't want that to slow down all your other customers as well. So you want to be getting the features out to people in a manner that that works for them. And what Ocuroot allows you to do is define a set of rules for releasing software, so that you can have those kind of complex requirements across multiple dimensions, and that it all flows together and it all sort of does what it's supposed to do at the right time. Another side of this would be like, say you have customers that want to have their own sort of like single tenant and dedicated isolated deployment. A lot of people I've spoken to have a requirement that they get paid quite a lot for that contract, because it's a lot of work to set that up and maintain it. And I want to reduce the barrier of entry there. So the idea would be that if you want an environment that's dedicated to a specific customer, it's like maybe one line of code or a few clicks, and you have that environment defined in your system with all the properties of that customer attached to it, and then it just builds that for you, doing things in the right order with all the right relationships.
So how this will be useful in other places apart from your place?
What do you mean by other places, I guess?
Other countries?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I think that there's I know there's a lot of regulation in different parts of the world, and that can be challenging to work with. And the EU and GDPR, that's a situation where you have a very stringent requirement for managing your software in different locations, and they have a physicality requirement for that. Like sometimes if you want to work with people in the EU, you have to make sure that you are serving them from the EU and all their data is kept there. A lot of countries, this can also be sort of a sovereignty requirement just for doing business with their government. There are countries that insist that if you're going to be holding information about their citizens while working with their government, it has to be located in their country. And then there's sort of like point of presence concerns, a lot of which you can alleviate with CDNs and stuff. But if you're working with dynamic data, you could very well want to have all these different deployments in different countries just so that people get lower latencies. And that's been a challenge since the beginning of the internet.
So how do you define this engineering aspect of the technology and the business side of the technology?
That is a good question. I think so. I'd sort of wrap the whole thing around a term, something similar to deployment orchestration. Sort of like managing deployments in a very complex area. I think that there are value drivers that are applicable to engineers and some that are more applicable to the business. On the business side, There's easier audits, easier compliance, easier security. There's a big business drivers, and one of those things that that every business has in the back of their mind. From the engineer's standpoint, there's increased productivity, ease of use, and flexibility. Being able to have a more satisfying experience while shipping features faster, and getting those features out, that's going to benefit the business. And there's also an agility side of things. Like if you're able to respond to a customer need to have a new environment for them very, very quickly, then that's going to be really good for your sales cycles. That's going to be really good for customer satisfaction.
So to sum it up, what do you say about Ocuroot to my audience? They can be uh, the engineers or the developers or the DevOps engineers or the software architects or people who are actually business owners and who runs different businesses.
Yeah. So I guess I'd say that if you're having challenges with managing large numbers of production environments for whatever reason, I think I might be able to help. If you have your own solutions for this, or you're working towards a solution, still love to chat to you because I can learn a lot from those kinds of conversations. Right now I'm in kind of a closed alpha, but always willing to bring more people on. Looking to get as much feedback as I can, and sort of evolve the product to become more and more useful to people with these kinds of problems. And I have an open booking link on Ocuroot.com, so if anyone wants to talk to me, they can schedule a meeting.
Definitely. I'll share the link in the description of this video also on the screen. And also you have already said it. Can you spell your website to my podcast listeners?
Yeah, sure. That's Ocuroot.com. That's Ocuroot.
Great. At last, as a developer who was into development and also who is into DevOps and now become a business owner trying to help different businesses in solving their problems. What's your experience about my videos? Have you seen any videos of mine? And also, what is your experience in this conversation?
I have definitely enjoyed this conversation. It's been great. I haven't watched as many of your videos as I might have liked, although I know you've been very prolific. You put a lot of really good stuff out there. I think it's good that you sort of like let people get their story across and let them talk. That's good. I think I will apologize for the conversation being a little stilted for the first 30 seconds or so. I didn't actually realize we were recording.
No problem. So, I have done masters in software engineering, also bachelor's in computer science and engineering. Right now, I'm working as a DevOps engineer for a London company. That's my full-time role. Apart from that, I'm interviewing experts from different parts of the world who are into technology industry, who are from business side of the technology, also who are working on engineering side of the technology. And also I'm trying to interview people who are non-technology related people like police officers, doctors, engineers, architects, and scientists and doctorates and all kind of industry people trying to understand what they are doing in their profession just to relate with technology industry and with the work that I'm doing. So I've interviewed more than 870 people till now, and also I interviewed the vice president of Amazon Web Services and also vice president of Salesforce, like a lot of company CEOs and founders, CTOs, CFOs, all kind of people. So, as per your observation, as per your experience, like how these conversations are going to helpful for me in coming days in my career.
Yeah, that's, I'm not sure that there's a lot of advice I can offer. I think there's like any conversation with people who have an interesting experience or a different way of looking at things. I think that's like always going to add to your own understanding and give you new perspectives and things like that. Like there's been I've definitely not interviewed as many people as you have, but I've spoken to a lot of people over the last few months, and I'm always finding out new and interesting things about the way that people do things, and sort of getting a lot of novel perspectives on how people see the industry, and what they think is going to happen in the future, or sort of like how you can get ahead. And that's always interesting. I think it's been like one thing that I've found is that since I left my last job, I've had this wonderful excuse to talk to more people and go to more events and make more connections. And I feel like I know so much more than I did before I started doing that, and I can only imagine the amount of insights and things that you've gathered through all the conversations.
So can I put this video on my podcast with your permission?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Can I also put this video and audio clip on my social media, internet, everywhere with your permission?
Yep.
So thank you, Tom, again for your valuable time and sharing your experiences and answering to some of my questions and telling about Ocuroot and how you're working and how it will be helpful for different businesses.
Absolutely, it was my pleasure. Thanks for your time. It was a great conversation.
Thanks again, sir. Take care.